So today I got a pretty nasty hate comment on one of my videos about growing potatoes, which, while I want to say it is what it is, I want to really address it because the video made me realize how important it is to explain covering your soil and how soil life kind of works. And as you can see from most of my beds, they're covered in arborist mulch right now. And that's mainly because I got all this mulch for free. Now, usually I use mushroom compost because I love mushroom compost. It is so rich and has so many nutrients, but it also adds to the soil, and it comes along with fungi that have already inoculated. Now, if you don't know, mushroom compost is a mixture of compost that's often been used to grow mushrooms or other fungi, or can be used to grow that. Now, sometimes it's a little high in salt content, but that's not always the case. And for me, I've only had an issue with it having too much salt in it one time, and it was easy to remedy with some topsoil added and mixed into that compost. But I kind of want to walk around my garden and show it off and explain my way of thinking and why you want to be careful with how you apply compost and mulch. Now, as you can see, for most of my garden, it's pretty well covered in mulch. All of these plants growing here, they're mulched in, and they're doing fantastic. Now, these plants are not planted into the mulch. They're actually planted below into the soil. And you can see when I move the mulch out that the roots go right into the soil. The soil is absolutely gorgeous. Look at that. You can see some of the mushroom compost that I've used in the past blended with our clay soil. And I leave all of our beds open on the bottom. So this builds our natural gumbo clay soil, get some more added nutrients in it, which gumbo clay works well because it can actually hold a lot of water. So all of this really works well together. And there are some other areas where I've added mulch in too, and you can see how great this looks all around the blackberries and the lettuce. Now, even areas where grasses and weeds have kind of trickled in over the year, this was actually covered in a thick layer of mushroom compost, which over time, you can see some of it up top still, it breaks down into the soil. So even covered soil won't always look the same. Now, if you look closely, you can see the mycorrhizal fungi. All of this white in my soil is actually fungi that's been introduced, and that will benefit my plants. Now, fungi can meet for miles. It can be a gigantic organism, and it helps communicate with the plants. So when you plug plants into this fungi system, what it actually does is help bring the plants water and other nutrients, which is really incredible. And you can have systems that are miles long. They are gigantic systems, or they can be small systems. And this really benefits a garden to get these systems in place. I have preached before on beneficial insects and shown videos about the beneficial insects that have come to our garden so that we don't have to spray harsh chemicals. And 90% of the time it works in our favor. We've lost some crops, or we've had some crop damage, but I'm not growing to sell. I'm growing a little bit for beauty, but mostly I'm growing to feed my family and distract myself and give me something healthy to focus on and kind of build something positive in all of our lives. And while I'm doing that, I enjoy kind of showing what works for me, even though it won't always work for everyone else. But I do want to kind of comment on not covering your soil, because I have one bed that I have not covered, and that's this bed here. And it is a potato bed that is about a week old, if that. We really started building it this weekend and filling it up, and then I planted the potatoes. So the potatoes haven't been here for a full week yet. If you guys have kind of watched how I've started them in little cups instead of planting them directly in the soil. In fact, I started them in 2.5-inch pots. That way I had a little more control of the potatoes. Now, I'm not just using topsoil. This is not just topsoil. It has a ton of broken down mushroom compost in it. So all of the darkness you see to the soil right here, this is all mushroom compost. And you can see the larger bits of wood in some areas. So the soil does have amazing rich compost mixed into it. And like I said, all the beds are open, so this is open to the native soil. And because this is a wet area, the grass doesn't necessarily grow well here, so you can kind of see the difference on what the soil actually looks like in areas of a yard that doesn't grow a lot of grass versus, the areas around the garden that might. And here's one of our new beds that we have not planted or put any mulch in it. Now, if I grow potatoes, I'll grow it the same way, where the soil's not initially covered, versus some of the other beds that you can see are very well covered. There's mulch in the beds, there's mulch everywhere else. So that's something to really think about. Now, when I grow potatoes, one important difference is that I want a really amazing root structure with my potatoes, because those roots produce the tubers that we eat, which we call potatoes. And so what I do is I initially plant in this organic matter of both topsoil mixed with mushroom compost, and then put some mushroom compost on top to protect the plants. Now, I had some extra space around the edges, so I plugged in some lettuce, which, to be honest, is struggling a bit because suddenly the temperatures dropped down into the 50s right when I transplanted them. So probably not the best move on my part, but they're popping back up and I know that they'll be okay. Honestly, in another month or two, it'll be way too hot for lettuce anyways. So here you can see all my potato plants. Some of them started out pretty small down here because you want to plant the potato pretty deep and just leave the leaves exposed right on top of the plant. So now this is specifically, I'm talking about pre-started potatoes, not ones that you just stick the seed potato into the ground. Because like I said, I started these in pots. And so I plant them very deep so just a little bit of the plant sticks up. Here's a pretty good example of when I first planted. And just right here, you can see 2 little leaves popped out, versus some of the neighbor plants that are getting pretty well established until we have this really good sized plant, and it's even popping up a little side shoot. So potato plants get pretty big, and I bought these from the feed store. I wasn't planning on growing potatoes, but I saw some red potato tubers and thought, wow, that would be great just to grow some potatoes. The kids have been asking for some, so why not? And what I'm doing is I'm waiting until these little guys reach about 8 inches tall. You can do it a little shorter, but I prefer to wait until they're 8 inches tall. And then instead of adding arborist mulch or mushroom compost right off the bat, I'm going to hill up. And when I say hill up, I mean kind of like a little hill. So it'll be right over the potatoes like this, hilled up around it, of soil right over the potatoes until only about 2 leaves are left exposed. And I'm going to do that all the way down. Now, since this one is already pretty well grown up, I'm just going to go ahead and show you what that'll look like by grabbing some that's already around here and just pushing it up around it. Just like this. Now I'm going to leave this little shoot right here exposed, although you could probably cover that too, no problem. This is just what I want to do. So you can see I'm just pulling soil around it. Now that's because there's extra soil in the middle because nothing's planted there. And you just cover those leaves all the way up. Now you can cover more. I could easily cover more of these leaves and it won't hurt anything, just leaving some leaves exposed. So look at that. And because this is a potato, it'll continue to push out of the soil. And realistically, you only need to leave about 2 leaves exposed. But now you can see, compared to the plant next to it, it has a bit of a hill. And because I planted all my potatoes in a line, just like this, I can come in all at once and hill up kind of like a furrow around these potatoes. Then I'll wait until they pop up another 6 inches out of the soil, and at that point, instead of using soil, I can choose to use either arborist mulch or mushroom compost, which is my absolute favorite thing to use of all time. Now, as far as this arborist mulch is concerned, I laid it really thickly in the walkways and thinly around plants that love heat because it was pretty warm. Now on the outside, arborist mulch doesn't get extremely hot, but in the middle of those piles where that mulch is just breaking down, it is literally eating and itself and breaking down. So those temperatures can easily reach up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. If you put something that hot on your plants and it's still breaking down, it is going to burn the roots and every part of your plant. Now, my roots aren't exposed to the mulch because they're down deep, but potatoes are a little different. They're not down deep. All of those little fuzzy pieces on the stem, those hair-like projections, those turn into roots, very similar to how tomatoes, the little hairs on them, turn into roots. And so if I'm piling mulch up against them, it could burn what will eventually be my future root system, and I don't want that. I want them to grow and establish really good root system so that eventually they'll produce really nice tubers below the soil line. And so that's why I choose to use soil to kind of hill up around them. Now, I don't leave exposed soil anywhere else in my garden when I can avoid it, because I love building that mycorrhizal fungi and even other types of fungi that grow in the garden. If you walk through my garden, one thing that you'll notice is that there are all kinds of fungi and mushrooms that are allowed to grow. Now, my kids are pretty educated on the fact that we just don't touch mushrooms, because if you don't know enough about them, you could eat a lookalike that is poisonous, and we don't want that. So we just don't touch the mushrooms in our garden. And my kids know that. So I don't have to worry about anyone getting sick or exposed to something that can be potentially lethal or dangerous. Look at that. There's another one. They're just everywhere. And so this is amazing. It creates that soil life, introduce fungi and healthy bacteria into our soil, which break down all of this material and compounds into amazing nutrients for our plants. And like I said before, by plugging your plants into these systems, even your new plants around your established plants, you're continuing to build this amazing soil and these systems in your soil, which are so incredible. And even here you can see where I don't have the mulch, the soil's pretty well covered by what some would consider weeds, but they're protecting my soil. And even where the weeds aren't, you can see that this mushroom compost is what is used on top of it instead of arborist mulch. Isn't that beautiful? And right now it's kind of dry from the top layer from the sun, but if you water it in, it can help retain a lot of moisture. It looks like we have a dud pea that didn't actually grow into a pea plant. We'll just cover it up and see what happens. And so it's important to realize, because sometimes soil can be covered, kind of like it is with mushroom compost, but as it breaks down and enriches the soil, it may just look like regular old topsoil. And that's not necessarily the case in many gardens. So look how amazing these plants look. These are just babies really starting to get established in the soil covering. And then over here where some more established plants are, you can see just how well they're doing. Now, I want to go over to this wood chip pile and show exactly what I mean by the heat that's in it. Now, this whole area where all these random wood chips are everywhere, that was all the arborist mulch that was laid down and how big the pile was. This pile is now only about up to my knees, but it was as tall as I am, and I'm almost 5'5". So that's a pretty good size for a mulch pile, and it was at least 15 feet wide. And now this is what's left of it. And that means that this area right here that's exposed is the center of the pile, and it's really, really hot. So what I want to show is, you can see where it's breaking down, both fungi and just the heat of it. This is kind of ashy and weird. So like I said, there's some fungi in here, but also it's just hot. And when I reach my hand down right below the soil surface, I wish I had a thermometer on me, but I don't. This soil gets pretty hot. So right there, it is literally smoking from the heat, which is why I'm trying to break it down some. We live in Southeast Texas, guys, and mulch piles have caught fire, and it can be pretty nasty business. Now imagine taking that 90 to 140 degree Fahrenheit mulch and putting it around plants, especially this type of potato, which loves cooler weather to grow. It will absolutely burn your plants. And I think it's really confusing if you're a new gardener and you don't understand how to apply mulch when you see comments on videos about covering soil and how it will not hurt or burn your plants. When the truth is, while it can be extremely beneficial, if not done correctly, it will absolutely burn your plants, especially when you're talking about plants such as potatoes and tomatoes. They're both related. They're both members of the nightshade family, and tomatoes were actually, most of them grow naturally like vines, which is why they're sprawling, and the indeterminate tomatoes that grow an endless amount during the season usually have to be staked up. Here, I'm showing you my tomatoes, which I've decided to already build up to the leaves, because instead of starting my own this year, I just bought some plant starts from a local grocery store, and I've grown them in the same soil as the potatoes and then covered them in this arborist mulch at the top. And that's just so that they can get a little heat, because when I planted these potato starts, I put about 8 inches of the plants all the way under the soil and covered them in soil and mushroom compost. So all of that will get good root structure. But with the potatoes, they're little bitty plants, so they need time to grow up, to have soil hilled around them so that they can develop that root structure. And that's a pretty big difference. So I hope that if you're growing for the first time, and especially if you're growing potatoes, that this video kind of explains why you want to be careful on covering certain plants and when you do it, and even how both arborist mulch or mushroom compost or whatever kind of covering or compost that you use in your garden can be messy and kind of destroy your plants if you're not sure on what you're doing. And you should be careful, because while people try to be helpful, some comments really can be misleading. And also, based on where you live, your needs for the garden may be totally different than mine. Like if I was to mulch with hay, for one, we've had some bad experiences with people spraying hay with chemicals and it destroying our garden, even when we buy organic hay. And two, it gets really rainy during certain times of year in Southeast Texas. And so that means slugs will come in here and little pill bugs and just completely destroy our entire garden. And that's messy business. Nobody wants that. So for us, things like hay and straw don't work well for covering our garden. But in other climates, it works amazing, especially in a drier setting. So I just want to take the time to say, hey, do your research, find out what works best for you, and don't be afraid to take some risks, despite what others may say, and grow what grows well in your area or what grows well for you. Because I guarantee you, the way that I garden and grow plants in my garden like this may not be what works best for your region or for the type of plant that you're growing. I really love sharing my experience so you can see how things work. And make no mistake, when the mulch and compost breaks down, you're going to get grass that you have to come pull out and everything else. And you can see where here's the mulch that was laid down, and it just kind of melts into the soil as it continues to break down. So can you tell that we live in the city? Because there is a ton of traffic noise around here. I do apologize for that. So as I was saying, what works best for me may not work best for you. But I love kind of explaining my way of thinking so that people who are either new to gardening or haven't gardened in this way understand what is working best for me. And I can tell you, transplanting lettuce is kind of struggling right now, but the other ones are looking great. But these potatoes are thriving. So I'm definitely looking forward to hilling up the second layer of soil. And as always, I'll do an update video and kind of show exactly what that looks like on these plants. Now, I still have this entire bed that I have not planted out, and I do not cover my soil with any kind of mulch until after the plants pop up if I'm planting a large number of plants. Now, if I'm planting in an established bed, it already has mulch, then I'll push the seed below the mulch and into the soil. And that looks like me moving this mulch around and just plugging a seed down here. And so here's the soil versus the mulch. And you can see how the mulch really helps build up the soil over time. And it is gorgeous. It also helps us to retain moisture in the hottest months of the year, which will have an entire month and a half that is nothing but triple-digit heat, and sometimes a lot longer. And these temperatures can start as early as May for us, and sometimes sooner. It is March, and we have already seen 54-degree weather all the way up to 89-degree weather. So that can kind of explain how extreme our temperatures get, and while it's important for us to retain as much water and moisture as possible in our garden. So I hope this helps out. I hope this kind of explains our way of thinking, and it also explains some of both the importance and dangers behind mulching and covering your soil when you're not entirely sure exactly how it works. So do your research, find out what works best for you, and experiment, and don't be afraid to go against the grain.